Many people believe aging is inevitable, but some experts argue that we could significantly slow it down or even reverse it. David Schmidt, what groundbreaking discoveries have you recently found and emerged in science on anti aging, making you feel optimistic about our potential to extend human lifespan?
Um, well, I'd say there's a number of reasons why I feel that way. First, there is a biblical history of human beings living to nearly 1,000 years old. And of course, some people prefer to look at this as a myth or legend or just simply stories. But for myself, I look at the Bible as being the inspired word of God, and that the events that we read about in the Bible as being true and factual. So, from that perspective, then you have to ask yourself scientifically, can we find any evidence on how this could be true? And if so, what are the underlying mechanisms? Now, at first, for many people, this may seem absurd. However, there are mainstream scientists today. I would point to Ray Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey, as among them, who suggest that there really shouldn't be an upper limit of human lifespan. So Ray Kurzweil, for example, the well-known futurist, would say, "Oh yeah, human beings are going to live to be 1,000 years old." So this is starting to be accepted now. So the question is, can we understand how this could be possible? And could we develop technology to allow human beings to actually achieve this? So, fortunately, there's an area of science called biomimetics, and this is something that has fascinated me for a number of decades now. But essentially, it's where we look at living systems, we understand how a living system does something, and then we mimic this with technology. So, a really good example would be spider silk. It's known that spider silk is about 5 times stronger than steel, and now there's actually companies today that make synthetic spider silk. So one day we can wear clothing that's bulletproof, but yet it's very thin and light.
Wow.
In my field of looking at longevity, we've been studying different types of life forms that defy what we would think of as aging. There are some species that uh, do not age entirely. And by understanding these mechanisms, we've been able to create some new and now patented technology that we're extremely excited about, that this is going to be within reach.
That is exciting. So, what are some of those species that you've studied that don't age and regenerate and have a very long lifespan?
Yeah, this work goes back more than 10 years now, 15 years, where we started looking at planaria. And planaria are these flatworms. We did some of this work at our labs in San Diego. We did work with another species called Hydractinia, which we did in conjunction with the Regenerative Medicine Institute at the National University of Ireland. And basically, these flatworms, the planaria, they can uh, not age and live for an undefined period of time as long as they're kept in an environment where they're given food, water, shelter, and they're not exposed to any type of disease or predator. And about 20 to 25% of their bodies are made of stem cells. And when the stem cells divide or when they differentiate, um, their cells don't change. And we were initially not looking to understand this property. What we were really looking at is how can we duplicate their incredible regenerative capacity. So, in other words, you cut off the tail of a planaria, you cut off the tentacle of a hydractinia, and it will regrow a brand new tail or head or what have you. And so eventually, I invented a number of different techniques to activate the stem cells in the body that would somewhat duplicate what these organisms are doing. But it was later on in studying ants and lobsters where it became self-evident that they were using a system of communication with light. and this light was highly ordered. And in fact, you could say it was even a biological code that they were
Mm.
using to alter their mitochondrial function. And in so doing, this altered the gene expression in the organism to allow it to defeat aging.
Okay, well, let's talk about that light. So are you referring to phototherapy here, David?
Well, in the case, so we're going to take two different cases because both are applicable to human beings, but in very different ways. So, what I would mean by that is in the case of ants, we would see that the queen ant would live 5 to 6 times longer than a worker ant.
Mm.
And so, if we correlate this to a human being, we would say then that the ant would go through a normal cycle of life and death. But how is it possible that within that same species that there's going to be such a wide margin of lifespan? So it'd be like if you had people that were living over in the mountains of Tibet living to 500. Well, you and I here in Florida, we're living to 100. What gives? And as it turns out, there was a species that we studied. It was a red harvester ant, and we found literature on something called the temnothorax ant. And in this particular case, the temnothorax ant would be susceptible to a parasite. Now, the parasite wanted to develop a symbiotic relationship with the ant. So, in other words, the parasite wants to survive. So, it goes into the stomach of the ant and it alters the gene expression and starts turning on mitochondrial function. And it does this essentially with 850 nanometer light.
Wow.
And in this particular case, the gene expression flips, cytochrome C oxidase production goes up, and now the worker ant can live about 5 to 6 times longer and not age in the process. So, this, of course, is entirely applicable to human beings because now we can say, okay, we can say it's been very well known that by altering mitochondrial function, we can reverse the age of the cell. And here it is, we see a practical example of that.
That is really fascinating, and I love the emphasis here on the mitochondria. There are so many health experts and doctors and scientists that are disagreeing about so many things: plant-based diet, vegan diet, keto diet. There's all these arguments, but I think all of us who study health and nutrition and teach about it will agree that the mitochondria are the name of the game, and supporting the mitochondria is going to enhance your longevity, your fat loss, your energy levels. You're just going to feel better. So what you're saying is in the case of the ants, this parasite, is it the ants? Am I getting the right with the parasite? Okay.
That's correct.
The parasite who wants a host that's going to live longer, the parasite stimulates that 850 nanometer light, or what's exactly happening there with the parasite again?
So, what happens is that the parasite, there, so in all living organisms, there's going to be a chain of signaling. This signaling is going to start with light, and then that light is going to turn on a specific biochemical process. So basically, there's a number of wavelengths of light that are going to turn on cytochrome C oxidase production. And one of those wavelengths is 850 nanometers, which is very well established in the literature today. You can also find something similar around 660 nanometers, which has a number of other benefits. Of course, one is in the infrared and the other is in the visible band. But in any case, what we see is that the signaling will start with light, but then it ultimately ends up expressing itself as a change in the biochemistry. And in this case, that's cytochrome C oxidase. So, cytochrome C oxidase is a chromophore, meaning it'll respond to light. And when you increase cytochrome C oxidase, it's part of the electron transport chain, which facilitates conversions of fats and carbohydrates over into energy. So, the net end effect is that we can turn on fat burning through this mechanism. It increases the total amount of ATP that's available in the cell, and this has a kind of a cascading effect in the cell. And in the process, the cell membrane can expand. This causes an increase in the voltage potential around the cell, and this has a downstream effect that when cells divide, there is an improvement or no change in gene expression. So this can explain how these species are defying what we would normally think of as aging, and fortunately, there's some parallels to human beings.
This is so fascinating. So, was this the initial research that you discovered that led you to create those energy patches?
Well, this actually goes back, no, this was a little bit more recent. The original impetus behind the energy patches is I had been developing survival equipment for the Navy through government contractors, and I had invented this new type of oxygen supply that I was told was impossible. But once I proved that it actually worked, I got invited to be on this design team for a mini sub, and
Wow.
the crew of the mini sub were Navy SEALs. And so I looked at the program, and the director had said to me, "Well, see if you can make a contribution to this." And I thought, well, these guys are going on missions where they have to be awake 30 hours, 60 hours at a time. And they would rely on caffeine or amphetamines to stay awake. So I thought, I've always been interested in health. Maybe we could find a way to keep them awake longer and give them more energy. And that was really the impetus behind it. So I thought, if we have cell phones and satellite communications, this is back in the 90s, maybe we could find a way to communicate with the cell and turn on fat burning, since we get more than twice as much energy out of fats as we do out of carbs. So that was the initial driver behind creating the energy patches.
It makes sense. I'm naturally most of the time in ketosis, which of course is fat burning. And then when I wear the patches, the energy ones specifically, it enhances that even more. Where I kind of feel like it's a superpower, and I'm just like I'm on all day until I don't need to be. So I love that. I'm already in a fat burning state, and this is enhancing that fat burning state, the beta oxidation. Where do lobsters play here?
Yeah. So what happened was in 2018, we introduced a product called X39. And this was really a game changer for us because X39 elevates a peptide called GHKCU. It's a copper binding peptide. And as the name would imply, it's composed of three amino acids: glycine, histidine, and lysine. And what's so interesting about this peptide is that it acts as a very powerful gene modulator. So if you were to look up information on the internet about the peptide, you will see that it resets about a third of the human genome back to a more youthful state. And we began to see this with people that would use the product. They would use the product for 2, 3 months and longer and start to physically look younger. So the research objective at that point then began, okay, we're actually seeing in human beings where people use this product and they look younger. Can we get 100% of the genome to go back to a more youthful state? And then we could stop aging. So, how are we going to do that? And I began to just simply make a list for the research team of, okay, let's talk about all of these species that don't age. We had already been investigating planaria and hydractinia for 10 years, but we wanted to go a little bit further. There's an organism called tardigrades, which are kind of like the Superman of planet Earth. They're microscopic creatures that are like almost impossible to kill. You can take
Wow.
them into space, and you can't
Wow.
you can't kill these things. Um, and then, of course, we got to lobsters. And what was interesting to me about lobsters is that as they age, they actually get physically stronger. And there were lobsters that have been found to be about 130 years old.
Amazing.
And the only reason why they die, they don't age at all. And the only reason why they die is that they get eaten by a predator. Um, they will get sick, and or they will outgrow the size of their shell. They can't molt past a certain size, so they get kind of crushed to death by the size of their shell.
Huh.
But um, other than that, they won't age. So I really wanted to understand what was going on here. And I went back to the Bible and I pulled up a passage from the Bible. I had remembered reading it, but I couldn't remember exactly from where. But it was in Genesis and it was after the flood. And God had said to Noah, okay, you can eat all of these creatures now, but don't eat their blood because that's where the life is.
Mm.
And so I thought, maybe we should take this quite literally. Maybe there's something in blood that hasn't been defined yet that's responsible for their life. So I started to pull up spectrophotometry of lobster blood, and I began to see a pattern that was forming. And so I invented this device that I called a biophotonic reflector, which is designed to stimulate the skin with the same wavelengths of light that I found in lobsters. And we were able to establish that it was able to very rapidly reverse the age of the cells in the human body, about 2 to 3 years in around 10 minutes.
Wow.
Um, it was very stressful for the cell, as it turned out, uh, but it showed us that it was possible.
There's more to that story that I heard you talk about, right? With the blood and the code. Could you talk about that? Because the first time I heard you share this, I was listening in my car to a podcast, and I had to stop. And what did he just say? I had to rewind it a few times. It gave me goosebumps. So I want you to share it with my audience because it blew my mind, and I think it's going to blow people's minds right now.
Yeah. So this would be something that would be done properly on a PowerPoint, to lay all of it out, but I can give everyone the punchline. And we have an event that's coming up in October where I'm going to take about 3 hours and go through
Wow.
this in detail so people can see all the math behind it. But I have been doing this work and I created a technology past the reflector to use this as a method to allow human beings to have benefits from the technology. And we're doing this work, we're seeing these really incredible results. And on a personal level, I take a Bible study. So I just want to be a better human being. I want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband. And so I think the values that are in the Bible, both the Old and New Testament, um, are great values. Love one another, live a life of peace, do no harm. And so that's the reason why I do these Bible studies and, to understand and have a relationship with God. And in this particular Bible study, um, we were looking at the book of Genesis. And the idea here is that in both Hebrew and Greek, each letter can be converted over into a number. And so we convert the first book in the book of Genesis, in the first sentence in the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Convert those words over into numbers, and you get specific values. So at first, I was looking at these numbers in this sentence, and it didn't seem like there was anything necessarily remarkable there. But I got out my calculator and started to uh, started to make some calculations. And what happens is that if you add certain the values of certain words together, a code starts to appear. So, for example, if you combine the numerical value of in the beginning, God, that comes out to the number 999. And if you combine heaven and earth, that comes out to 777 as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this code appear 777-888-999. And I thought to myself, I've seen that ratio before. So again, I started to calculate, and what I found was that the numerical code and ratios that are in the first sentence of the book of Genesis are identical to those found in lobsters. So
Gosh.
it's a statement that God, the Bible's the inspired word of God. God creates everything. And as you would expect, because God represents light, that God signed his signature like an artist in living things using light, and we can measure it today. It's there.
That's incredible. I got goosebumps again. That is incredible. What a finding. Like, what were your initial thoughts and feelings when you discovered this?
Absolutely, it was incredible. I would say, um, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and I would never push my own beliefs. I wasn't out to try to prove the existence of God. Um, so, as a researcher, to see this code appear would have suggested to me intelligent design, that this was not something random. It's something that couldn't occur by chance. My formal education is in computer science, management, and biology. And so, in programming computers, you have to have an intelligence in creating that code. And anyone that programs computers knows that if you have one wrong line of code, that you get corrupt data out the other side and the program will suffer. It may not work. Well, in human DNA and in our genes, the amount of data that is there is absolutely extraordinary. So the idea that you could have a random set of occurrences that would lead to the complexity of DNA is absolutely absurd. And people that are atheists don't have any explanation for how DNA could have been created, where that initial code came from. So, so what I saw with this was that there was intelligent design in the function of how lobsters are achieving their longevity. There's a very specific biological code, and to me, that was already satisfying. But then to find out that this code was in the Bible, it was just mind blowing. And I would say I felt a personal responsibility to bring this information out to the world. This is something that people should absolutely know exists.
Yeah, amen to that. I'm grateful that you are. I'm grateful that you that you shared it with my audience. It's just absolutely remarkable. Whether whatever your faith or background or belief is, like that is absolutely remarkable. Something that you cannot argue or deny. And coincidences, I think, are just words we use that are really like just God wink moments. It's like
Right.
they're beautiful, especially when
Yeah.
the pieces line up the way that it did this way for you. That is remarkable. Are you familiar with Dr. John DeMartini? Does that name ring a bell to you?
Yeah, I've looked at, I don't know if I've seen that name before. I've certainly looked at the works of people like Stephen Meyer, Hugh Ross, and to have their take on it. And, they're certainly very, very brilliant people and coming at this from a completely different direction. And what's really so astonishing is that when we observe nature, we see God's work at hand. That this is just not the Earth didn't just simply appear, over a period of billions of years. It had to be created. It's just simply too complex. There's no other way to explain it.
Right on. Yeah. You
Yeah.
remind me a lot of Dr. John DeMartini. He's a brilliant man and a researcher. That's why I said that. And I say that in a respectful, complimentary way. Let's transition now to the aging conversation. We know that we have telomeres around our cells that protect our DNA. And the shorter those telomeres get, the more damaged our DNA becomes. And the faster we age, essentially, it leads to oxidative stress and inflammation. So, what would you say, David, are the top things that are leading to these hits that our DNA and our genetics are getting that are aging us faster? And where do LifeWave, these patches, come into play? You already shared a little bit about that, but where does it come into play with protecting that DNA?
Yeah, so we've actually, well, first, I'm not a medical doctor and we don't make any medical claims.
Yes.
And because we are interested in longevity, telomeres is something that we do study. And we have funded a number of independent clinical studies to look at this and answer this question. One thing that was very interesting is that we did a number of studies with Dr. Norm Shealy, who's a very well-known medical doctor and neurosurgeon. Dr. Shealy retired just a few years ago now, but we were doing telomere studies with him, and we had done some studies before COVID and then during and after COVID. And what we had found was that the stress of the pandemic played an enormous role in people's lifespans, shortening them, not
Wow.
in a good way. So if you look at the literature, um, it would be extremely consistent with this concept of how emotional or physical stress leads to undesirable changes in the human body. Specifically, stress will, and we're talking about negative stress, not like exercise. Obviously, we can have very beneficial stress, such as exercise or fasting.
Hmm.
But in this particular case, we would say um, someone is involved in a relationship and emotionally it's detrimental. Somebody is working a lot of hours, not exercising, smoking, drinking too much, these types of things. This type of physical or emotional stress will lead to an increase in both oxidative and inflammatory stress in the body. And these biochemicals are necessary because they're part of killing off viruses and bacteria. They're part of the repair system in the body. So, for example, when we have an injury, the stem cells are attracted to the inflammatory cytokines. So, these biochemicals serve an important role. But as we age, our ability to eliminate these chemicals from our body becomes reduced. And part of this is because of reduction in antioxidants. So it's very well known now that if we subject our DNA or our telomeres to oxidative stress or inflammatory stress chronically, that this will lead to breaks in the DNA and a shortening of the telomeres. And of course, this leads to um, a increase in risk in disease and increase in risk of death from all-cause mortality. So it is so critically important for people to manage stress on a daily basis.
It is, and to your point with what you just shared, the last whatever 4 or 5 years with COVID, so many people were under just so much mental stress. There's still a few people that are still stressed out. Number one, turn off the news. You'll be less stressed if you just shut down the TV, turn off the news, and start listening to podcasts and conversations like this. So when we discuss, I want to discuss the patches. I want to share how I discovered it, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. About a year and a half ago, one of my clients I was working with, we're doing some heavy metals detoxification, some ketone fasting, and he shared a webinar with me on these LifeWave patches. He's like, "What do you think? Should I use this?" And I had so much going on that I didn't really have the bandwidth to really look into it. I thought it looked interesting, and I saw some of the studies, and I'm like, "Yeah, you might want to give it a shot. It looks pretty cool and promising." Anyways, it got off my radar. And then about 4 or 5 months ago, a gentleman named Dr. Lonnie Herman, who's a doctor here in South Florida, I interviewed him right here in my studio, not about the LifeWave patches, but he showed up with a whole bunch of patches. And of course, I'm asking about the patches and he's sharing it with me. And I'm like, "Oh, I remember learning about that." And he's sharing all these testimonials with me on the interview, sitting right back behind me here. And I thought, this is so interesting. My first thought, and I'm not a skeptical person, but my first thought was, these testimonials seem really exaggerated. Like that was my first initial thought. Like there's no
Right.
way. Like
Yeah.
he's showing me photos, and I'm like, there's no way. But I'm like, I like to experiment, so I decided to go all in and buy a whole bunch of patches and become a partner. So I got all the patches. I got, I forget how many I got, but I think like 27 sleeves. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to share this with my audience, I got to first experiment with it, see what I notice, and then start experimenting with people, and then go from there. So I started wearing the X39, which is the stem cell one, and the energy patches, the Silent Nights one. And I got all of them. The first thing that I noticed is this. We were having lunch here at my house, and my fiance's dad, it was his 89th birthday, and we made lunch for her mom and her dad came over, and we're sitting at the lunch table. We're all eating, and I'm looking at her dad, and he's not eating, and I'm thinking, is he okay? And they're telling me that he's having really severe like gum pain and jaw pain, and it was really bothering him, and he couldn't even eat his food. And I had just gotten the patches, and I'm like, and I asked him, can I put a couple of patches on you just to see if this works? And he said, okay. So I just put two of the ice wave patches right behind his neck, and within 10 minutes, 100% of his pain was gone, and he started eating his food. And I thought, interesting. Okay, that's quick results there. And then right after the meal, we're sitting down on my couch. We're watching television, all having a conversation, and we have three cats and a dog. One of the cats that we have is dealing with sinus issues because the previous place we had molds and we had to leave, but she's still dealing with the sinus issues. And she's there like wheezing with snot coming out of her nose. And I thought, oh, I got the AccuLife patches that I had been putting on my dog. Let me try putting it on her. And there's no placebo effect with animals, so not with this cat, right? So I immediately put the AccuLife, two of them, the beige and the brown, the beige and the white one, and within a second, her wheezing was gone. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So, and I could go on, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important for my audience to hear this, my experiment. I've gotten more deep sleep with the Silent Nights patch, and I track my deep sleep really religiously with my Oura Ring, and I get 90 minutes on average. And every night I put that Silent Night ones above my right big toe. It goes for 2 hours. And anyways, I could go on and on about what I've seen. So I started to introduce it to my Keto Camp Academy students, and the majority of them have reported great success. And what I've noticed, and I actually want to ask you the question here. Minerals, minerals, minerals. You hear a lot of people out there speaking about the benefits of taking minerals. And it is important because in this day and age, our crops, our fruits, and our vegetables, they are depleted of minerals. So you've heard of the keto flu, you've heard of symptoms doing keto and fasting. People just don't feel good sometimes. This is the number one reason why. So my go-to for replenishing my electrolytes and my minerals, for enhancing my immune system, for gut support, for detoxification, is Bean Minerals. It has fulvic and humic compounds, and these have over 70 trace minerals and really important electrolytes to replenish your body with. Check out Bean Minerals over at beanminerals.com. Use the coupon code Azadi, my last name, at checkout to get a nice discount. That is AZADI at checkout over at beanminerals.com. Why is it that some people notice an immediate benefit while others, like me, took me a few weeks to actually notice those benefits? What do you think is going on there?
Well, I don't have to think about it because we have 20 years of research, 80 clinical studies where we've looked at this. Each of the products are a little bit different in terms of the amount of time it takes for people to respond. With the pain relief, it's really remarkable. 96%, according to our studies, of people that use Ice Wave respond in about 2 to 3 minutes if the product is applied properly. We did a study with a fellow by the name of Dr. Pierre Volkmann, extremely well-known medical doctor in France. We did this study at General de Santé Hospital in Lyon, France, and we had 75 people. And what we showed is basically within 2, 3 minutes, well, in this case, it was under 5 minutes as it was measured, we could get the majority of people out of pain, and then they were still experiencing pain and pain relief an hour later. So, what's going on here? First, the mechanism of the patch is that it's going to stimulate the skin with light. So it's a new form of phototherapy. Now, this is going to be when we're stimulating the skin with light, we want to have a desirable effect. That will depend on a few things. The first thing is the body hydrated, and can the body make energy? So many people today are drinking too much coffee. They don't drink enough water. They have a poor diet. So they may not respond as well, or they may not notice it immediately because of that. Another thing we found was that the signaling mechanisms from the patches depend on electrolytes. So people have deficiencies of calcium, magnesium, potassium. They may not feel something as compared to people that don't have those deficiencies. Now,
Interesting.
interestingly, many studies that we've done, we've measured effects on the equipment or in the blood, but people say, well, I didn't feel anything. But we could actually objectively measure in blood and urine or bioelectrically that the change occurred. So the majority of people will feel a change within the first day to 7 days, and then other people they need a little bit more time. So we recommend when people before they start using the product, they take a picture of themselves, they write down how they're feeling with the quality of their sleep and energy during the day. If sometimes with people it's subtle, where they say, I've used the product for a week, and I notice now that I don't get tired at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have to be reminded about that.
Yeah.
I would say it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And it's
Yeah.
funny that you just said that because on the weekends is like my study time, and I usually just sit on the couch, start reading books, and I read for hours, and I usually nap on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, a good little 30 minutes, 60 minutes, sometimes 2 hour nap. However, I'm not really tired throughout the day, but I do tend to nap when I get into study mode on the couch. I've noticed since I started wearing these patches, it is very rare for me to nap, and it's I kind of like the napping sometimes. So it's giving me so much energy
Yeah.
that my fiance is like, "You don't nap anymore." I'm like, "You're right. It's been months since I've taken a nap." And here's something else. I track a lot of different things. I wear continuous glucose monitors. I have my Aura ring, so I'm tracking my heart rate variability, my resting heart rate, my body temperature, my deep sleep, my REM sleep, how many times I wake up. So I've been tracking this stuff for years, and I'm constantly looking at it to see what's improving it, what's making it the same, or what's making it worse. And since I've been wearing these patches, and I've been consistently wearing the X39, I have one right behind my neck here, the X49 right underneath my belly button, and then the energy patches, and then at night, the silent night ones. Those are the ones I've been consistently wearing pretty much every day, and then I'll kind of rotate other ones in. My heart rate variability has been tremendous, above average. But here's the thing: I've been pushing myself to see how far I could take it. Meaning, I'll do all these. You mentioned the beneficial stressors, like these hormetic stressors, where I'm fasted, David, and then I'll do a cold plunge in my cold plunge, and then I'll work out, and then I'll play basketball, and then I'll go into my infrared sauna, all fasted, and then I want to look at how I recover. And usually, when I do all those stressors, it'll take me about a day to recover, and then I could go do that again. But I got to tell you, since I've been wearing these patches, I recover the next day. Like my HRV is up instead of down. My resting heart rate is down. And I feel like Wolverine. I've been posting it on my Instagram stories. I'm like, I did all these stressors, and it says I could do them again today because I feel great. So I've been feeling tremendous with them, and it's non-invasive. I'd love for you to talk more about that. Like it's non-transdermal. It's using your own body's heat. Could you share a little bit more about the application of it?
Well, first, and that's a great point because the patches are non-transdermal. There are no chemicals that are in the patches that are entering the body. So this is not like a smoker's patch or a patch with drugs in it. Instead, the product contains stereoisomers of amino acids and sugars that stimulate the skin with light. So our bodies have heat, and heat is infrared light. You apply the patch to the skin. Our body heat activates the materials in the patch and now stimulates the skin with low levels of light. And this is a blend of different wavelengths of light. In light therapy, this would be called photobiomodulation. But it simply means we stimulate the skin with light, we can get a desirable effect. It's like going out in the sun, and sunlight causes the body to make vitamin D. It's the same biochemical system or process, or biophysics if you prefer. And so in this particular case, the patches stimulate the skin with light, and this causes a favorable change in the body, such as the improvement in energy metabolism. In the case of X39 and X49, it's really interesting because we did studies where we gave people exercise before and after using the patches, measured their urine, and what we saw was that their ability to metabolize different amino acids improved. So the utilization of leucine went up about 30 to 40%.
Wow.
And of course, we know leucine is going to turn on mTOR. It's going to improve muscle protein synthesis. So this explains why you're recovering more quickly.
That is fascinating. I didn't know that, and I didn't also know about the electrolytes helping with that signaling process. So keeping your electrolytes up, especially when you wear the patches, is a good idea.
Yeah, if you look at the literature, you would see that about 60% or so or more of the population has a deficiency in magnesium. I've seen numbers where over 90% of the population has a deficiency in potassium. And of course, we'd be talking about the United States here in a Western diet. So it would be important for people to look at this and supplement with magnesium, supplement with potassium if their doctor says that it's okay for them. Another important thing about some of these minerals, especially potassium, it's found that potassium regulates the alkalinity in the body. So it's not really necessary for people to drink alkaline water. I'm not
I
knocking that,
agree.
but I'm saying potassium is what's there in the cell to act as a pH buffer. And that would make potassium supplementation very useful for athletes that want to help manage their levels of lactic acid and for people that suffer with cancer because they have runaway lactic acid levels and they can buffer that with potassium.
That's good. I've also read a lot of research on taurine really helping with exercise recovery as well. And, and to your point about alkaline water, I'm not a fan at all. The
Yeah,
gut is very acidic, and why would you
yep,
want to chronically drink alkaline water? It's not a good
absolutely.
idea.
Yeah, and what you mentioned about taurine, we've studied taurine and also beta alanine from
Yeah,
the perspective of athletics. Um, Beta alanine, of course, is used to support levels of carnosine and AHK in the body, and ultimately, carnosine is going to act like a pH buffer. Carnosine is also found in the heart and in the brain, so it supports the health of the cardiovascular system. It supports cognition. And this is another tool that people can use to help manage lactic acid. The taurine in and of itself is very interesting. I think over the next 10, 20 years in the longevity community, what we're going to find is that there is a whole frontier to be explored with taurine. We know that
yeah.
taurine levels in the human body decline with age, and while it does function like an antioxidant, I think what we're going to find is that it really is a metabolic precursor to a number of hormones in the body, and it can be used to help reverse that.
I agree. Yeah, taurine is really promising in the research.
Yeah.
I want to dive into melatonin a bit with you. Before we do, for those watching and listening, if you want to learn more about the LifeWave patches, there's some videos. I also included the clinical studies. I believe it's 91 plus clinical studies you have on the patches. And you can learn all about that and even order some if you want. If you go to ketocamp.com/lifewave, and camp is spelled with a K, and we'll drop that link for you in the podcast notes to check that out. Melatonin. So I'm writing this new book. It's called Metabolic Freedom. It'll be out June 2025 with Hay House. And one of the topics in the book, a small section, is on melatonin and the antioxidant effects of melatonin and how it's way more than just a sleep agent.
Right.
Every cell that has mitochondria, which is every cell except the red blood cells, produce melatonin, and the gut makes melatonin, and not just the pineal gland. And it's actually the most important antioxidant for the mitochondria. It's glutathione and melatonin. Those are the only two that the mitochondria use. So
Yep.
I love melatonin, and I love the Silent Nights patch because I'm not actually taking exogenous melatonin. Not that I'm opposed to that, but it's actually stimulating my own body's production, which is what I love about the patches. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about melatonin and what the Silent Night patch is doing.
Well, no question, melatonin is extraordinary. What we're finding in our longevity research is the positive and negative feedback cycle that's in the mitochondria is a balance between the antioxidants and the oxidative system. Not really a surprise there, but as you say, it's about a balance between melatonin, glutathione, and also nitric oxide.
Hmm.
So in other words, if we were to elevate glutathione, at some point, glutathione production is going to match the nitric oxide levels in the cell, and this ultimately contributes to production of ATP. So, one of the keys with this then is that if we want to achieve lifespans and health spans above what might be normal for human beings, we want to support the antioxidant systems in the body, glutathione, melatonin, and also have precursors to nitric oxide like citrulline, amongst a number of different choices. So with melatonin, it's extraordinary because our view that the master antioxidant being glutathione is now shifting a little bit over to melatonin. We don't want to diminish the value of glutathione since it is ubiquitous. It obviously serves an incredibly important function. But melatonin is interesting because there's a number of studies showing its antiviral properties and its properties to selectively destroy cancer cells.
Yeah.
So, medical doctors like Frank Schallenberger, who's very well known for his work in ozone therapy, Dr. Schallenberger performed a clinical study for LifeWave back in 2005,
I
and
read it.
yeah, it was a privilege to meet him. Really extraordinary guy, and he's had an incredible impact on people's understanding of health, ATP, ozone.
Yeah. And
Well,
he was skeptical at first, right? I believe he was
oh, it
skeptical.
was so funny. I met him at a conference, and I saw the work that he was doing with capnometers and indirect calorimetry, and said, "Hey, I'd like you to do this study." And he said, "Well, if you want to pay me to do it, it's fine, but I don't think these things are going to work." And he was so impressed with the results that he came and spoke at our very first conference in Las Vegas in 2005.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
that was really fun. Tremendous guy. Um, but in any case, one of the things that he looks at that's related to this conversation is the ratio between NAD and NADH. So a lot of people that listen to your podcast think, okay, I'll take NMN or NR or niacin and I'll increase the NAD levels. That's really only half the problem. You want to use oxidative therapies like ozone therapy to balance out the ratio of NAD to NADH. But in any case, in Dr. Schallenberger's work, he'll give his patients 60 milligrams of melatonin and find he has told me that that would be one of the most powerful things that he does for his cancer patients.
Wow.
So very
Orally, is it oral?
that would be oral.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be oral. So this, of course, is way outside the scope of what most people would do. When we think of oral supplementation, it's around 3 milligrams,
Yeah.
6 milligrams or so. So the intent of Silent Nights is to normalize the melatonin levels. So I'm making this distinction because, on the one hand, I want people to know that melatonin is a very powerful antiviral, anti-cancer supplement, but that's hormone rather, but that's in supplement form. And I want to distinguish between the silent nights to support healthy melatonin levels. That's really to uh, normalize sleep and normalize melatonin levels.
Yeah.
So we did a study with, in this case, it was Dr. Shealy. And what we found is that if we took people that were getting a poor quality of sleep, we could bring them back into normal levels and actually increase sleep time by about 60% using silent nights. And of
Wow.
course, the benefit is you don't wake up and you feel drugged, right? You feel refreshed
Yeah.
and relaxed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was gonna say I've noticed tremendous benefits with the deep sleep specifically. I haven't seen it bump up my REM sleep, but it took my deep sleep on average from 90 minutes to 2 hours when I wear the Silent Nights patch.
Yeah, it's I would say that melatonin is an extraordinarily interesting molecule because it shows up in some very unusual places in nature. For example, olive oil. When we talk about compounds that potentially have very powerful anti-cancer properties. Olive oil is an interesting one. So, uh, olive oil that has a very high content of polyphenols, oleuropein, oleocanthanol. Um, there are very few products on the market that are really good because the olive oil tends to oxidize. So most of the olive oil on the market is not very good. But real olive oil is incredibly therapeutic, incredible as an anti-inflammatory. Well, I got in some olive oil to evaluate and try, and I noticed it was making me tired. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And then I found out that olive oil has a natural content of melatonin.
Wow.
So sometimes we find in nature these molecules like DMT, they kind of show up everywhere, and that's a sign that they're serving an incredibly important function. So we might be able to speculate that it's the melatonin in the olive oil that's protecting the active compounds that are so therapeutic. But that of course would be speculation.
That is interesting. So I'm going to take a shot of olive oil tonight before I
There
go
you
to
go.
bed.
Yep, there you go.
And you're right. Most of it is has been sitting on the shelf, getting light, artificial light, and then some of them is even cut. They're cut with seed oil as well. You want the one that I get is organic, first pressed, extra virgin, and when you take a shot of it, it burns your throat. It makes you cough. Those are, like you said, the oleocanthals, the polyphenols. So I haven't
It
noticed
should
that
be buttery, right? It should have
buttery.
like a
Yeah.
buttery texture. That's anybody that's had real olive oil knows the difference between that and the stuff that's sold at supermarkets. Yeah.
Hey, I want to just briefly interrupt the video you're watching to share something with you. One of my favorite companies that I use for health and longevity and biohacking is a company called Bond Charge. And they have a whole range of incredible products, including the blue light blocking glasses you see me wear right now. But one of my favorite products from them is an infrared sauna blanket. Sauna blanket works by raising your heart rate to a workout or a training session. So you burn more calories while you're actually lying down and relaxing. Also, it's going to cause you to sweat. And one method of flushing out toxins from your body is through sweat. There's also one of my favorite benefits, this endorphin release. Every time I get out of the sauna blanket, I feel like I just got a 60-minute massage. So it's easy to set up. It's super convenient. Head over to bondcharge.com/keto camp. And if you use the coupon code KETOCAMP at checkout, you'll get 15% off your sauna blanket. And actually, any of their products are 15% off with that code. All right, let's get back to today's video. And you know what's interesting on olive oil, because so many people look at the smoke point of oils and use that to determine if they should use the oil to cook with at high temperatures or not. But there's a lot of flaws with that. Even with olive oil, most people say don't cook with olive oil, and they're right when it's not real olive oil. But there was actually a really interesting study from New Zealand where they took the top 8 most popular cooking oil. So it was extra virgin olive oil, the good stuff, olive oil, coconut oil, rice bran oil, grapeseed oil, peanut oil, and I think canola and a few others. So some seed oils. And they did 2 different test trials, one at 364 degrees Fahrenheit, where they heated all the oils at that temperature, and then one at 400 and I think 20 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours, deep frying. And they looked at oxidative stability, and coconut oil scored the highest there. But what they also looked at was how many polar compounds were produced after the oil was heated. And these polar compounds are known to be carcinogenic, inflammatory. And it turns out that the extra virgin olive oil produced the least amount of these polar compounds, even at high temperatures, because real olive oil is so protected by all the antioxidants. So don't be afraid to cook with it. I'm not, as long as it's the real stuff.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that would be counterintuitive. And from the perspective of longevity, there's a number of tools that people can use to improve their health now. And olive oil would be one of those very simple, inexpensive tools if you get the real stuff. It's, of course, as you know, very rich in monounsaturated fats. It's going to help to manage inflammation, improve overall quality of life. And this is really what we're talking about ultimately from the perspective of longevity, that if we can manage oxidative and inflammatory stress, we can see a dramatic improvement in health span and lifespan.
Right on, right on.
Yeah.
A quick recap, not a recap, but closing the loop on melatonin before I get to the next topic here. We have a few minutes left. Um, I looked in the research on melatonin, taking exogenous melatonin, so supplementation, and I'm a little crazy, so I've experimented with actually 300 milligrams of
Oh,
melatonin
oh, okay.
suppository.
Okay.
But the reason, and I don't recommend doing that often, don't get me wrong, I just experimented with it. But I haven't seen anything in research that shows there's a negative feedback loop in humans with melatonin like there is for testosterone and other exogenous hormones. What have you seen there, David?
So I think what I would say is melatonin is extremely interesting in the sense that what we would expect is that melatonin levels go up in response to a normal sleep cycle. Um, and but there's a lot more going on here because in brain chemistry, ultimately, melatonin is going to be linked to something called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF is a regulatory mechanism for stem cells in the brain. So, one of the things that goes on here, we go to sleep, and we know that the majority of anabolic metabolism is going to occur at night. And so one of the things that's going on is melatonin gets released and it triggers a repair cycle in the brain and also throughout the body. But like other hormones, so we would say with men, they're going to be interested in, testosterone. We know that testosterone is going to peak in the morning and then the levels are going to start to decline later, a little bit later on in the day. But we always have that testosterone in our bodies, right? It's not like it's going to go to zero and then back over to 100. And melatonin's very similar in that regard. Is that what's being found now? Is that melatonin is there all the time? It is cyclical in terms of the levels, but it's present in the body all the time. And I would say some of that is still a mystery. It's
Mhm.
not completely known why it's there outside the scope of sleep. I think we could speculate. As you pointed out, it's very important in the production of energy, but it's very clear it's doing a lot more than that. And I don't think we really know what some of those things are today.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what we see in the next few years on melatonin.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to share before I ask you the final question. I'd love for you to share the testimonial of a Denmark woman who was 93 years old, and her daughter was using the X39 patches, and she ended up applying it to the 93-year-old mom. And what happened there?
Actually, it's funny you asked me this question. I can share the picture if you like.
Yeah, share it. You could hit the share screen button at the bottom there.
I'll do that.
Let's take a look because I've seen the photo, and hopefully those who are listening, you could go on youtube.com/ketocamp to watch it.
So this woman in Denmark, her mom, who was 93 at the time, was suffering with a number of different health problems, as you might expect with a 93-year-old. And she just simply had heard about X39 and was wondering, well, I wonder if this is going to help my mom, maybe give her a little bit more energy, help her to sleep a little bit better and improve her quality of life. And what happened over a 2 month period of time is that she started to look about 20 years younger. It was startling. I would say this would not be typical of things that we see, but this was the first um, testimonial like this that we had received when we started rolling the product out. And of course, it became incredibly exciting. It's like, okay, we're seeing age reversal here. Maybe not complete, but we're starting to see it. So we really need to understand what's going on so we can improve upon this.
That's
Yeah, it
so
was,
cool.
it was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love it. I love it. Well, David, share with my audience where they could learn more about, like you said, you have an event coming up, learn more about you. Where do you want them to go?
They go to lifewave.com. They can learn more about the products and the company and what it is that we're all about. And we'll be having a conference in Dallas. It's sold out at this point, but I think we'll probably be offering. We'll be offering an online event so people that can't make it to Dallas will be able to watch it online.
I love it. We'll put that information down below. Last question is this. I talk a lot about my favorite supplement in the world, and it's called vitamin G. And you can't patent it because vitamin G is gratitude. And I love experiencing and feeling gratitude. It's so powerful. I'm writing about it in my book and the healing benefits of being in a grateful state. So I want to ask you, David, what do you have vitamin G for today?
Yeah, well, I would say that each day I pray when I wake up and before I go to sleep, and it's always about giving thanks. And because I think when you turn to God and you give thanks for all the things that you have in your life and you have that mindset, that there are so many good things that follow. And I have so much to be thankful for. I have an amazing wife, amazing kids. Uh, I'm so grateful that I get to invent for a living, which has been my passion, my dream, that I get to pursue those things, and that I get to work with an amazing group of people. Our brand partners all over the world are absolutely extraordinary, and they simply want to make the world a better place and give people hope with our products. And it's quite humbling to see the work that they do.